Is now the time players should start taking advantage of the lower prices on the reserve list and picking up some of the cards they've always wanted? Well, in today's video, we're going to be taking a look at cards players should be paying attention to and which cards they probably should be avoiding. The markets are losing money left and right. Why would anyone consider investing in a collectible like Magic the Gathering at this stage when there are much easier ways of making money? That's what we're here to discuss. Welcome back, everyone. MTG Moxman here, and thanks again for hanging out with me on the channel today. Before we start today's video, if you enjoy today's content, don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel, turn on your notification bells. I upload content every single day of the week, and I look forward to seeing your comments in my comment section. Now, when you're talking and looking at reserve list cards, depending on the perspective you're coming from and why you want to go after these cards and what your risk tolerance is, that's a whole separate debate. When you're looking at the conversation of collectibles, the market, will I make money, will I lose money? You have to decide for yourself why you desire the cards. For some players, it's a card they've always wanted. It's a card they want to put in a commander deck, in a legacy vintage deck. Maybe they're hoping to start playing in legacy vintage. For other players, it's the chance to speculate and make a lot of money down the road if the market does turn around. In today's video, we're going to kind of take a look at both of those side points. But remember this game can go to zero. It can go to nothing. You're taking the risk, not me. I'm merely talking about what can happen on either side of the market and some of my opinions on how the market has reacted in the past, as well as how it could behave in the future. So when you're talking about the market space of Magic the Gathering, as well as any other thing in the world, take a look at Canadian bank stocks right now. If I bought a bank stock a year ago at $95 for, let's say, Bank of Nova Scotia, you guys can look this stuff up, you'll see the historical data. The bank stock was $95 and it was paying $1.03 per quarter, or basically, $4.12 a year per share. At least you get a dividend. Same as Magic cards, you own the card, you get to play with the card. There's a correlation there depending on how you decide to take my advice, or my opinion actually. Now, when we're taking a look at BNS, when it was $95 a share and I was buying it at that point, I thought it was still a pretty good bargain. I'm getting a discount. I'm getting a dividend, not a discount. I'm getting a dividend. I'm getting some money back on it. I get to reinvest that money to make potential future gains. Plus the stock could go up. I was hoping for it to split. Now we're in 2023, the dog days, and the stock is collapsing. It's like $58. I've lost massive amounts of money. Everything is down. The world's looking bleak. But I'm still getting that dividend. I'm still getting, it's actually higher now. It's $4.24 a year per share. So if you buy a share now, as opposed to a year ago, I'm actually saving almost, 35 to 40% of that price that I paid a year ago. Just like Magic cards, everything is down right now. The question really is, will it go back up? Is there a chance for you to make money? Or is this just the time to buy so you can get a card you want? Is this the cheapest it's going to be? Depending on the flip side of those two coins and why you're seeking out a reserve list card in the first place really does matter when you're part of this conversation. So let's take a look at the point of, I just want to own the card. Well, then these cards are really cheap right now. And I'll show you some cards today I think are fantastic value for the cards they are. I'm only going to show you guys 5 cards because we could go on and on about all these amazing cards in Magic that are on the reserve list. But I'm going to show you 5 potential cards I think are utterly amazing for the price point they're at and what I think they could do in the future. Now, when we're talking about somebody trying to speculate, a lot of speculators will think they got to hit a big card. They got to hit a Power 9 card. I would not be buying Power 9 cards right now. That is a card I would be avoiding. Lower cards are always the first cards to fall. The highest value cards, Power 9 and the like, Power 10, they are the last to fall. Because those people holding onto those cards have invested a lot of money, and there's not as much need for liquidity in the market at that level of buyer. Those buyers had secure funds in the first place. They don't have to sell. They can just wait. They don't knuckle under the pressure. They can sit in the backdrop. You don't see me listing any of my Power 9. Most of my friends are not listing either, but they are buying those odd pieces that come up because players may put it on a credit card or maybe just are under tough times. But speculators do need to be aware that if you're hoping to make money in this market, it is still a long way off before the market truly turns around, but there is signs of life in the backdrop of the reserve list right now. There are signs that there are certain cards that are at historical highs that are now at historical lows, which means there's an opportunity to grab these cards if it's a card players have the potential to play with, or if there are potential uses for this card in Commander or other formats that players may desire to play in the future. It's something you always have to keep in mind, and you have to dissect that information to see how these cards could be utilized in a future deck, not always right now, in a future deck. So you can make your gains. You want to buy it as low as you can. You want to sell it as high as you can. But remember, when you want liquidity, even if it's, let's just say a card is like $60, you want to sell it for 40 because you want to be in and out the door the fastest. You want to get your revenue back. So if you buy a card for $5, you waited 5 years and now it's at like $60, you're like, this is the sell point. You're not trying to sell it for 60. You actually want to sell it for 40. Your cost basis was $5. You're trying to get as much profit out. So yes, you could wait and sell a few copies one at a time, but you'd like to sell play sets of 4. You want to sell a few out the door where people think they're getting a deal. You want to utilize that potential. So remember those two sides of the coin. The player just wants to own the card and finally own a piece of Magic history they've always wanted from the reserve list, versus a player who wants to speculate and make money and flip things. The risks are different because the player who just wants to own the card is going to hold on to it forever. True collectors of Magic usually don't give up what they've collected. They hold it for the long term. They plan on being buried or giving it to their kids. That's how it happens. Whereas speculators, depending on how much they've leveraged and how much personal income level they had and how much available cash that they have at their discretionary, time in their lives, they can say, I can spend $200 a month and I don't care if it goes to zero. Depending on where they're at, it depends on how much damage they can do to a market, consolidating a position, grabbing cards, and being financially tolerant enough in case the card keeps going down, but hoping for potential return further down the road. A lot of age has to factor with that, and history of playing the game. It's not an easy market to stand in and go look at the losses. I understand that very well. So let's take a look at a few cards. Let's talk about what we're looking at when we're looking at really cool Magic cards to own from the reserve list that have some potential for either collecting, just because you got to have the card, or the potential to invest in later and see where this card goes. The first card I want to discuss with everyone is going to be Fork. This is a revised copy, and if you looked on TCG Player, you'd find it for around $27 US. Locally in Canada, it'd be around $50 for a near mint one or $30 for heavily played. You can see I've left some data points here. When you looked at 2014, this card was around $20. Then you look at 2017, it's around $20. And 2019, it's around $25, $30. Hits the high of 150 during the hype FOMO buyouts, and then actually kind of sharply goes down at first, and then gradually tapers off to where we're back to 2023, still falling, but it isn't back to its original price. This card has always had a purpose in Magic. Although it's not as well known as some other cards, it doesn't have cool iconic artwork, what it does for a deck is invaluable. Even in a game like Commander, this card has playability, which means it always has a certain value, a certain level of appeal to players, and it's not the most expensive card to buy. So when you're looking at a card like Fork, at this price point, which is basically the price of a Big Mac meal here in Canada, is it worth buying? Is this a card you can go out and get and enjoy and have for years to come? Yes. Yes, it is. Lots of playability depending on what format you're playing in. It can be used and utilized in multiple types of decks in multiple formats. So this is a good buy. To me, this is a card I like to own. I always keep a play set of 4, and in some cases I keep 8 for the potential investment value as it goes up. Now at the same point, seeing it's been as high as 150 as the FOMO, but it's like a sharp contrast point. It went up really quick and fell really quick. It means this card will probably not balance out to those levels for a very long period of time to come, but it'll always have a certain base value. So investing in this card and buying a couple of copies or buying at least one for a Commander deck, you're not likely to lose. You're not likely to gain too much either. Low risk, low reward for a card like this right now. Pretty fair deal for a lot of players looking to get into it. I can see why people have the appeal of owning this card, and why right now, if you're on TCG Player and buying this card right now, you'll see there are no copies available to be shipped to Canada. It got sold out this week. It's bought out and not available on TCG Player coming to Canada, but those in the US, you still have access to copies. So does Card Market and things like that. Now, the next card I want to discuss is going to be Abyss. Now, this is a very expensive card. This is from Legends, 4 Horsemen card. It's amazing. Now, this card has been as high as around $3,000 during the FOMO buyouts, and you can see it took longer for this card to start falling. the price memory and players' behavior toward this card has held on a lot longer than other cards. But before 2018, you can see this card was around $400. It was really a lot lower, didn't have as much value, but I mean, it was still an expensive card. It always has been because of what it does. Enchantments were harder to get rid of back in the day. They're much easier to get rid of nowadays, which means this card, although it still has high playability, it can be taken care of quite easily by very simplistic cards now in Magic the Gathering, where before it was a lot harder. So some players aren't playing with it as often, which means there are more available on the market. Then we had the crash in the market, which made even more become available. This is a card, although it's amazing and fantastic, I actually believe it will continue to fall. You can find this on TCG Player for around $500 US. It's around 750 Canadian. What a great deal, depending on the condition you're looking for. Italian versions are around $400 in the US. Here in Canada, it's around $600 for Italian and $1,100 for a Canadian, slightly played, almost near mint. They, I think even places like 401 Games had like BGS rated copies if you wanted to be a collector type person. But most people I find who want this card want to play with it. This is not for a speculator to buy right now. The price point is not nearly low enough, and you'd be utilizing a lot of risk and a lot of capital hoping this card's going to reach those new highs. This is not an investment card. This is a collectible playing card. It's a card you're going to play in Commander, play in older school formats, and have fun with. Buying into this card as a speculator, I consider that far too risky. I would avoid a card like this unless you're just going to be playing with the card. Now, when we're talking about our next card, this is Winding Canyons. Most of you probably wouldn't expect me to put a card like this on, but there's a lot going for it. When you take a look at the points of the value, this thing started going up way back in 2017, 2018, 2019. You start seeing an increase in price. Then in 2020, it actually valued out a little bit. It wasn't one of the first cards people thought about buying. Then we had the spikes in the market where it hit that, like, look at that, like $75, $80. And it's been falling ever since, but it's not a collapse of the price like we saw with something like Abyss, like we saw with other cards like Fork. This one's a lot more gradual. It has a lot of bumps going down. Because again, this card has playability. Unlike a card like Griffin Canyon, which only affects Griffins, Winding Canyons does not come into play tapped. It lets you utilize colorless mana right away, so you're not at a mana drawback depending on the colors you're using, and hopefully it's not your first land in the turn, but it also gives you something a lot of other cards don't. This card, no matter what deck you're playing, lets you put creatures into play as if they had flash. You can just tap 2 mana plus this land, and you could play a 3/3 creature on your opponent's turn. You can do crazy stuff, depending on what your mana supply is, but the point is, it lets you do something that other cards don't. So if you're a Commander player and you're playing creatures, this card can be used. If you're an old school player, you're playing creatures, this card can be used. It has playability. It has versatility. And most players never see it coming. They'll see it on the board, they'll understand what it is, but they don't understand what you're going to do with it. They don't understand what creatures you can put into play to mess them up on their turn. And this card's $17 US on TCG Player. That's like $21 Canadian. Here in Canada, by the way, you'd have to spend around $25 Canadian for a near mint copy. Now, they were sold out. I couldn't find any locally, but the idea that it's around, if you put in, wish list, there's only like one player who has it on wish list, so I didn't even bother going too in depth. But the idea, it's around 25 to $30 Canadian, okay? You would buy this on TCG Player, and of course, you would use my affiliate link found in the description of this video and all of my videos. Click the link, go to TCG Player, and anything you buy, this channel gets a 3.5% kickback. It's crazy. Lets me buy cards for the channel. Thanks a lot for everyone who chooses to do so. Got a shield for myself. A great card. Okay, and at this price point, buying 4 of them for like $80, there's a reason why I wouldn't put something like Volroth Stronghold on right now. The price hasn't fallen low enough. It isn't at the lower price point I'd like to see a card like that to make it truly something you might take a risk on. Whereas this card is low enough that buying 4 and only spending $60 seems a pretty low risk endeavor for the possible rewards. Plus you can actually play with the card and enjoy it in multiple Commander decks. So it has a lot going for it as far as I'm concerned and in my opinion. Now our next card. Let's take a look at Lake of the Dead from Alliances. This card has continued to fall. It's been as high as around $300 US. You can find it on TCG Player for $55. Here in Canada, it's like $100 Canadian near mint, but it's sold out. So let's just look at the TCG Player price, $55, moderately played. As an investment card, it's probably low enough you could buy a couple of copies and hold on to just in case. And I wouldn't really care about the condition because somebody who wants that card wants it to play with. As an investable card, it has a little bit of room to wiggle with, okay? Because you can see how high it's been, how low it is, and it's kind of had that bounce just like we've seen with Winding Canyon. So it has the possibility to rebound. And of course, cards like this are found and utilized in tons of decks because there's ways of untapping lands. There are lots of creatures now and a lot of enchantments that find ways to untap your lands, and that includes non-basic lands like the Lake of the Dead. Being able to sack twice, get 8 mana is insane. Using things like Wrenn and 6 to bring your lands back, Crucible of Worlds, Fast Bonds, all kinds of other crazy utilized cards that can fit in, can make it insane for a card like this. Everyone thinks of a Gaia's Cradle. Everyone thinks of Yavimaya Cradle of Growth and all kinds of ways of doing it. But at the same time, I look at this and say, that card's amazing. It's $55. It costs less than things like Shoulder the Apocalypse that are getting reprinted. Ragavan. This is insane for this price point. But as a player who just wants to own a copy, now is your time. As an investor, I would say wait and see, because I think this card is still falling down more, and you want to try to hit those cards that are moderate to light played to save a few more dollars, because the first cards out the door are the ones that are going to be the cheapest for players to buy if the market ever spiked. And we still could be years away, so you want to get it as cheap as you can. I still think there's a lot of room for this card to fall. There's a lot of players who kind of like stacked up on cards like this and bought a lot of copies. Some of those players need some liquidation now, so you're better to wait another 90, 120 days and see if this card continues to fall. Now, the last card I want to share with you guys is going to be Wheel of Fortune. And it's very interesting to see on TCG Player, this card is $250 US. That would put it over $300 Canadian, but here in Canada, you can get a heavily played copy for $250, which is more like $160 US. So you could just go to a place like 401 Games, look up Wheel of Fortune. I think they had 3 or 4 copies. And no, I'm not exactly promoting that store. It just seems to have the lowest prices right now. So that's the one I'm mentioning. And they had copies in. So I'm not always looking at 401. I look at Harry T. I look at Card Fusion. I look at all the stores I can find. But this one right now had the cheapest available copies. And I'm not looking for near mint. I just want to see what the cheapest would be. So if you were a person who needed this card, you could have it shipped to the US. You can have boxes shipped, but you could have that card shipped to you for $160. Are you kidding me? Considering this card has been almost $1,000 for near mint. And again, it had a spike though. That's what ruins it. Had a spike. It went straight down afterwards. Didn't really recover. A lot of players lost quite a bit of money as this thing fell. It hung around a little while at the 500 and then continued to fall. The question now is, will it keep falling? I think it's nearing the bottoming of its price for players who bought and invested in the card. But if you're a player who wants to own this card to play with, this is definitely a good time to buy. $160, seriously? You don't need a near mint, you need a playable card. For those who are thinking of speculating and investing in a card like this, guess what? It may or may not be your best time. It just depends on how many people are hoarding copies and how many people can afford to hold on to those copies long term. So it could be nearing the bottom for a player who maybe wanted to get some prizes, get some stuff together. It's getting to my head like, that'd be a pretty good card to put into the 20K party, you know, for some of those mystery booster packs. It does start thinking that way in my head. I'm not sure if it's there yet, but it's definitely getting close to even where I'd be willing to take a risk in buying that card. I'm just saying these are prices and thoughts you have to think about, because the risk of 250 Canadian or 160 US may not be in everyone's pocketbook, but for some players it is definitely something they can think about doing because they're in a much more stable place. Understand my opinions on these are not for everyone, but for certain players in certain price points, in certain stages of their life, this might be something that is easily affordable. So let's wrap this up and talk about it. So depending on where you fall as either a collector of the card who just wants to own a single copy, carry it into your collection forever and always be able to enjoy it, versus a speculator, an investor in Magic who's hoping to flip it, make some money, the actual opinions of these two parties are going to vary greatly in how they decide their risk aversion, price points, and how they view the card. When you're a speculator, you guys see how many times that card is being played, which decks it's being used in, and what are the potential upside of this card in the future. What cards could be created to utilize and bring value to the card you've just speculated in, and how likely is that to happen? Whereas a collector who just wants to own it and hold it really doesn't care if there's connecting cards later. There's already a reason they want to own the card. Either it's nostalgia, it's something they're building into a deck, and they have no intention of letting it go. Those two opposite sides of that coin have radically different views, and it's always something to keep in mind, especially if you're on the speculator investor side and you're wondering how you're going to come out ahead and how you're going to make money out of these cards. Be sure before you go in and always accept that the losses could be 100%. For a collector, 100% doesn't really matter to you because you wanted the card anyway. You're just glad the prices are coming down. And some of these cards are probably at a better price point now than they've been in years, and it might be your time to buy. For the speculators, pay close attention to the cards you're after. Make sure you can actually utilize returns in the future based on how many you're buying and what risk you're willing to take to make that profit possibly happen. Either way, guys, it's a fantastic day in the world of Magic the Gathering. Thanks again for stopping by and hanging out here on the channel with me. And as this game is always so amazing, don't forget, always bring a friend to Magic. And I look forward to seeing you guys tomorrow for another video. Have an awesome day. And of course, a thank you and shout out to the fantastic patrons I have supporting my channel each and every day. Without these patrons, daily uploaded content is not possible. So thanks again for my supporters. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Well, here we are at the end of the Ramble Jamble. If you made it this far in the video, you're part of the team. You're on the team. You have to be here every time now, and you can't miss anything. You're always here now. Welcome back to the end. As a parting piece of advice, as somebody who still buys reserve list cards every month, some of the people buying these reserve list cards, depending if the market does turn around at some point, which I still believe it will, some people are going to make a lot of gains. Just like in the stock market, people who hold on long term, as Warren Buffett would say, they always come out ahead. Weak hands fold. People who can hold on become rich. I'm curious to see how that all plays out in the future. I hope you guys are too, because it's very interesting stuff. Anyway, thanks for hanging out. Thanks for being here on the channel. Sorry the video was so long, but there was so much information to go over. Look forward to seeing you guys tomorrow. Have an awesome day, because we deserve it.